Nobody knew why the galaxy had stopped breathing for a man who fixed things with his hands. Ethan Cole did not see the first screen light up. He did not see the second one either, or the 1,000 after that, or the 10,000 hanging in station terminals, embassy halls, cargo depots, hospital atriums, transit lounges, and polished chambers so far above his life they may as well have belonged to another universe. He was in the back of his repair shop on Dock Ring 9, sleeves rolled to the elbows, fingers blackened with carbon dust, trying to coax a dead thermal relay back to life while rain hissed against the corrugated roof overhead. The shop smelled like hot solder, machine oil, old coffee, and the faint metallic sting of ozone that never really left the walls. Outside, freight haulers groaned through the midnight lanes, their engine wash rattling the loose neon sign that still flickered coal repairs in tired blue letters. Inside, the only light came from the bench lamp over his shoulder and the intermittent green pulse of diagnostics crawling across a cracked tablet screen. He leaned in, listening the way some men listen to music, head tilted slightly, eyes narrowed, patient with the small language of failing machines. A bad capacitor had a different complaint than a burnt trace. A cheap off-world converter whined just before it quit. A loose contact trembled like it was ashamed of being found out. Ethan knew all of them. He knew the sounds because he had spent most of his life around things people discarded the second they stopped being convenient. Broken radios. Broken loaders. Broken heaters. Broken promises. Broken luck. He made his living giving them one more chance. And maybe that was why, when the emergency broadcast cut through every comm speaker on the dock at exactly 11:43 p.m., the whole station seemed to lurch while Ethan only paused for half a second, soldering pen still in hand. The voice that rolled across the ring was calm in the way only official voices ever were, too composed to be comforting. It came first in standard, then in 3 trade tongues, then in a clipped earth-accented version that made the hair at the back of his neck rise before he even understood the words. Priority transmission authorized by the Interstellar Concord. All civilian and diplomatic networks are to hold public. Visual channels. Stand by for identification. Ethan frowned and looked up. Somewhere beyond the rain-streaked front window, conversations died. Boot steps slowed. Even the vending drone outside his shop went silent, its cheerful little hum cutting out mid-cycle. Then every display on the dock changed at once. Ads vanished. Freight schedules disappeared. Departure boards, weather grids, menu panels, customs notices, gambling feeds, shipping manifests, all of it washed to black. For one strange suspended second, the station looked like it had lost power without actually going dark. Then the black became a field of stars, slow and cold and impossibly clear, and in the center of that silence one human name appeared in stark white letters tall enough to command a planet, Ethan Cole. He stared at the nearest screen through the smeared glass of his own front window, soldering pen cooling in his fingers. For a moment, he honestly thought there had to be another Ethan Cole somewhere in the galaxy. Someone important. Someone polished. Someone with better boots and a cleaner shirt and a life that did not involve arguing with old circuit boards after midnight. But the station had already begun to turn toward his little shop, faces lifting, eyes narrowing, curiosity moving through the corridor like electricity finding wire, and Ethan felt his heartbeat thud once, hard and heavy, beneath the faded gray fabric on his chest. 18 hours earlier, nobody on Dock Ring 9 knew his name. 18 hours earlier, Dock Ring 9 was all rain and neon and exhausted machinery, the kind of midnight that made everything look lonelier than it was. Water slid down the front window of Ethan Cole's shop in bright crooked threads, catching the blue from his sign and the red from the freight lane beacons outside until the glass looked like it was bleeding light. The roof ticked under the steady hiss of ion rain. Somewhere down the corridor, a cargo tug let out a tired hydraulic groan, followed by the hollow clang of a loading ramp settling into place. Ethan stood on a short step stool under the half-lit sign, reaching up to switch off the outer panel before the storm burned out another circuit. His shoulders ached. His eyes felt grainy from too many hours staring into cracked housings and scorched boards. The station clock above the customs arch read 5:47 p.m., and all he wanted was to lock up, heat the leftover soup in the back room, and spend 10 quiet minutes not listening to anything with a power cell. He climbed down, wiped his hand on a rag already stained black and copper, and slid the front latch halfway into place. Then he heard it. Not the storm. Not the corridor traffic. A small sound, sharp and uneven, like a device trying to breathe through a broken lung. He turned toward the mouth of the service alley beside the shop. At first all he saw was rain silvering the grated floor and steam curling up from the vent lines. Then a figure stepped into the light. She was tall by station standards, though not imposing, wrapped in a dark travel coat slick with rain and clinging cold to her frame. The hood shadowed most of her face, but the skin at her jaw caught the neon in a soft blue sheen, the color of deep water under moonlight. One gloved hand pressed a compact device against her chest. The other braced on the doorframe like she had come farther on willpower than strength. The thing in her arms was no ordinary personal tech. Ethan saw that immediately. The casing was elegant in the way expensive alien engineering always was, seamless where human manufacturers loved screws and access panels, but one side had split open along a hairline fracture that leaked a dull silver pulse. Not a spark. Not smoke. A pulse. Slow. Irregular. Wrong. Every few seconds it emitted that same strained little stutter he had heard from inside. The woman lifted her head just enough for him to catch the lower half of her face, rain beating along high cheekbones, lips set tight against either pain or pride. Her voice, when it came, was controlled but thin at the edges, like she had forced calm over panic one layer at a time. Can you repair this tonight? Ethan looked from the device to her hand. No jewelry. No visible station band. No transit tag. Her boots were good quality but dusted with the pale grit of upper-deck platforms, not cargo routes. She did not look like a dock thief, but he had learned a long time ago that desperation wore nice fabric when it had access to it. Depends what it is, he said. Depends how broken. Her fingers tightened around the cracked shell. If it shuts down, she said, a great many things go very wrong by morning. That was not how frightened people usually talked. Most said help me. Most said please. Most said how much. Ethan opened the latch again and stepped back from the door. Warm shop air rolled into the cold corridor carrying the familiar smell of solder, old insulation, machine oil, and burnt coffee. Bring it inside, he said. She hesitated for one beat, as if the choice itself cost her something, then crossed the threshold. Rainwater slipped from the hem of her coat onto the worn floor tiles. Behind her, the station thundered on as if nothing had changed. Ethan locked the door anyway. The shop felt smaller the moment she stepped fully inside, as if the rain and noise of Dock Ring 9 had been forced to wait on the other side of the glass while something far more delicate took their place. Ethan moved ahead of her and cleared a space on the central workbench, pushing aside a tray of loose fuses, a disassembled heat regulator, and an old tablet with a cracked corner that still displayed parts invoices from 3 weeks ago. The bench lamp cast a tight white circle across the metal surface. When she lowered the device into it, the light seemed to hesitate on the thing, sliding over curves too smooth to be mass-produced and seemed so fine they looked grown rather than manufactured. Ethan had worked on enough imported tech to know quality when he saw it. This was beyond quality. This was the kind of engineering people did when cost stopped mattering. Up close, the damage was worse than he had thought. A fracture ran across the outer casing in a shallow crescent, and beneath it a translucent layer pulsed with dim silver light, uneven and strained, like a heartbeat skipping in sleep. Tiny glyphs shimmered and vanished along the rim faster than his translator lens could catch them. The core was trying to stabilize itself and failing. Every 8 or 9 seconds the whole unit gave a faint shiver, followed by that same thin, wounded sound he had heard from the alley. Ethan set both hands on the workbench and leaned in, studying without touching. What happened to it? Her hood remained up. Rain still clung to the fabric in dark beads, but he could see more of her. Now in the bench light, the fine blue of her skin, the pale reflective edge of her eyes, the kind of stillness some people wore when they had been taught from birth that fear was something to conceal, not confess. "It fell," she said. Ethan gave her a look. "That is what you are going with?" She met his stare for the first time then, and the color of her eyes stopped him for half a second. Not just bright. Luminous. A cool violet with silver at the center, like distant stars caught under ice. "I am going with what is useful," she said. "You asked about the device. Not my evening." There was no insult in her tone, only a practiced reserve, which somehow made it sharper. Ethan exhaled through his nose and reached for a scan wand. "Fair enough." He passed the sensor over the cracked shell. The screen lit up with unreadable architecture, layered signal pathways folding over one another in patterns that made ordinary circuits look childish. He frowned. "This is biosynced." She said nothing. He angled the wand again and the readings deepened. Not just biosynced. Adaptive. The device was responding to her proximity, modulating current around a living signature only it seemed to recognize. Whatever this thing was, it had not been designed for general ownership. It belonged to one person and one person only. Ethan set the wand down more carefully than before. "You brought me a very expensive problem. Can you repair it?" The question came immediately, flat and direct, but there was something under it now, something tight enough to hear if you lived around failing systems. Not fear exactly. Urgency held too long behind straight posture. Ethan glanced toward the front window. Outside, rain flashed under passing freighter lights. Inside, the silver pulse stumbled again, weaker this time. He looked back at her. "Maybe," he said. "But if I open the inner shell and the core collapses, I cannot promise I can bring it back." Her throat moved once as she swallowed. "Then do not let it collapse," she said, and for the first time since entering his shop, her voice sounded less like command and more like hope trying not to be embarrassed. Ethan did not smile. People with elegant boots and expensive problems always thought skill came with obedience, and he had spent too many years on dock. Ring 9 proving otherwise. He pulled a slim magnetic driver from the rack above the bench, rolled a clean cloth under the damaged device, and adjusted the lamp until the silver fracture stood out like frost on glass. "You realize," he said, "that telling a repairman not to let something collapse is the kind of advice that makes us charge extra." Her gaze followed his hands, careful and unreadable. "Then perhaps you should charge extra," she replied. Ethan let out a quiet breath that almost counted as a laugh. There it was. Not softness. Not panic. Steel wrapped in good manners. He had expected fear from someone carrying a dying piece of technology through a storm. Instead he got dignity sharpened into a blade thin enough to miss if you were not paying attention. He liked that less than he probably should have. Or maybe more. He set the driver down and reached for a pair of field gloves with conductive mesh at the fingertips. "Before I touch this, I need two things," he said. "First, you stand exactly where you are and do not grab for it if something sparks. Second, you tell me whether opening the shell triggers a lockout, a signal beacon, or something else unpleasant that will make my night worse." Her eyes narrowed slightly beneath the hood. "You assume I know. I assume people do not carry devices worth more than my entire shop without learning the basics." That earned him the briefest pause. Then, with visible reluctance, she stepped closer to the bench. The movement let the coat fall open just enough to show the dark, clean lines of a fitted travel layer underneath, practical but too well made for freight decks. A faint geometric shimmer traced the fabric near her collar, disappearing when the light shifted. Official issue, Ethan thought. Or close enough to it to make no difference. "No lockout," she said at last. "No public beacon. If the inner seal fails, the core will wipe itself rather than be accessed by another user." Ethan looked up. That is a very important detail to mention before I begin. You had not begun, she said. He stared at her for a second, then shook his head and got to work. The outer seam resisted every normal tool, which annoyed him on principle. Alien luxury engineering had a habit of pretending practicality was beneath it. He switched techniques, warming the casing with a focused thermal thread while the diagnostic pad mapped stress points across the shell. Numbers crawled over the screen. Structural integrity at 38%. Core rhythm unstable. Environmental contamination low. Intentional tampering probability, the pad guessed, 64%. Ethan stopped moving. He read the line again. Then a third time. This did not fall, he said quietly. The silver pulse reflected in her eyes. No, she said. He lowered the tool. The rain tapped the window. Somewhere in the front corridor a station announcement chimed and faded. Inside the shop, the air felt suddenly thinner. Ethan studied the fracture, the pattern of the damage, the slight scoring along one edge where a precise instrument had forced pressure into a place no accident would have found. He knew sabotage when he saw it. Not crude. Not rushed. Deliberate. Whoever had done it knew exactly how close to failure they could bring the device without killing it outright. Why bring this here, he asked, to me? At that, something changed in her face. Not a surrender. Just a brief lowering of whatever wall she had been holding in place since the alley. Because, she said, everyone else would ask what it was before they asked if they could save it. The word settled into the shop more heavily than the rain. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then back at the device on his bench, its failing pulse reflected in the polished metal tools hanging above it. Everyone else would ask what it was. He believed her. Not because she looked noble, though she did in that restrained, impossible to place way some people carried rank like temperature. Not because the thing on his table was clearly worth enough to buy his shop 3 times over. He believed her because the fracture in that casing had been made by someone patient, and patient damage usually came from people with resources. People with resources always wanted answers before help. He flexed his fingers inside the field gloves and reached for the microspreader. Then you picked the right dump on the wrong station, he said. Her mouth moved the smallest amount, not quite a smile, more like surprise had brushed past and forgotten to announce itself. Ethan slid the spreader into the seam and activated a low vibration cycle. The tool hummed in his palm. Silver light fluttered under the shell. Come on, sweetheart, he murmured to the machine, not to her. Do not choose tonight to become dramatic. The casing separated by less than a quarter inch. Inside, a lattice of translucent channels curved around a compact central chamber where the core glowed weakly behind a membrane like frosted glass. Even Ethan, who trusted hardware more than most people, had to pause and appreciate it. The architecture was beautiful. Not decorative. Efficient in the way only true mastery ever was, elegant because someone had understood the material so well they had stopped fighting it. Then he saw the damage beneath the fracture and his jaw tightened. A stabilizer filament had been scored almost through. Another had drifted loose and fused itself against a control node. The whole system was cascading around the failure, trying to reroute faster than it could heal. If that last filament snapped, the core would wipe itself exactly as she had warned. Ethan pulled up a magnification screen and began sorting options. None of them were cheap. None of them were easy. He opened the parts drawer beneath the bench and found what he had hoped not to use, a hand-built resonance bridge packed in foam at the back, the last good one he owned. He had made it 6 months earlier from salvaged military-grade contacts and a legal amount of stubbornness, intending to sell it to a transport captain with more money than patience. The captain had never come back. Ethan had kept the peace because shops like his survived on one hidden miracle at a time. He held it under the lamp, watched the copper veins catch the light, then set it beside the cracked device. Her eyes followed the movement. That part is rare, she said softly. Ethan snorted. That part was my rent if somebody important had a bad week. He did not miss the way her expression changed at that, as if the math of his life had just become visible to her in a language she had not expected to learn. Then why use it? Ethan adjusted the bridge, calibrated the contact points, and steadied his hands over the open shell. Because if I put the cheap substitute in, this thing dies in 2 hours and you look like you have already had enough of those. He worked then, fully, the rest of the station falling away until there was only the smell of heated ceramic, the hiss of the thermal thread, and the measured rhythm of his own breathing. The old bench lamp warmed one side of his face while rain-cooled air touched the other. Once, the silver pulse dipped so low he felt her draw in a sharp breath behind him, but he did not look up. He anchored the bridge, rethreaded the scored filament, and rebalanced the current by feel more than sight, listening to the device the way he listened to every wounded machine that found its way to him. Little by little, the strained stutter eased. The pulse steadied. The silver light deepened from sickly to strong. When the core finally settled into a clean, even rhythm, the whole bench seemed to exhale with it. Ethan shut off the tools and leaned back, tired all the way into his bones. The device lay quiet and whole between them, glowing with a calm that made its earlier distress feel almost impossible. She stared at it as if she had not quite allowed herself to imagine this moment. Then she looked at him. "How much?" she asked. Ethan peeled off one glove finger by finger, reached for the rag on his bench, and wiped the black dust from his hands. "Nothing," he said. Her brows drew together. "Nothing." He met her luminous violet gaze with the flat patience of a man who had made peace with his own bad financial decisions years ago. "You needed it working more than I needed the money tonight," he said, and for the first time since she had stepped in out of the rain, Lyra Vane looked at him as though she had no idea what kind of species he belonged to. For a second she did not move. The repaired device rested in both hands now, its silver pulse steady and quiet, throwing a soft glow across the wet edge of her sleeve and the worn metal of Ethan's workbench. He had seen gratitude before. It usually arrived fast and loud, with too many promises attached to it. What crossed her face was different. It was quieter than that, and somehow more unsettled, as if he had handed her back more than a machine and in doing so had disturbed some careful arrangement inside her that she had depended on for years. The rain kept whispering against the window. A ventilation fan clicked overhead. Somewhere in the wall behind the parts cabinet, old pipes knocked twice and went still. Ethan reached for the register anyway, out of habit more than expectation, and closed it with a soft metallic snap. "We are done here," he said. "Try not to drop it again." Her gaze lifted sharply, and there it was at last, the faintest flash of dry indignation. "You are very certain I dropped it?" Ethan wiped his tools one by one and lined them on the cloth with methodical care. "I am very certain you are not going to tell me the truth, so I might as well keep my version." The corner of her mouth shifted again. This time it came closer to becoming a smile, though it vanished almost as soon as it appeared. Then she reached beneath her coat and produced a slim credit wafer from an inner pocket, black with a narrow band of shifting gold that marked it as belonging to some financial tier Ethan had only ever seen from a distance. She placed it on the bench between them. "Take it." Ethan did not even look down. "No. It is more than enough." "Still no." Her fingers remained on the wafer for a moment. "Is refusing payment a human custom?" Ethan leaned one hip against the bench and folded the rag in half. "No. It is a me custom." That seemed to trouble her more than if he had lectured her about ethics or made a performance of being noble. She studied him like a puzzle that kept changing shape. "Why?" The question came quietly, without edge this time. Not why refuse the money. Why help at all? Ethan looked toward the rain-smeared window, where blue neon blurred across the glass and turned the station corridor beyond into a watercolor of motion and shadow. He thought of rent. Of the resonance bridge he had just burned through. Of the stack of unpaid invoices clipped beneath the register. Then he thought of the sound the device had made in the alley, that thin, failing little cry no machine should make if someone still had a chance to stop it. He shrugged. You looked like the kind of person who had run out of people willing to be useful, he said. I know how expensive that gets. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It gathered around them, warm from the bench lamp and silver from the quiet device in her hands. At last she withdrew the credit wafer and tucked it away. Then, with more formality than the moment seemed to need, she lowered her hood. Her hair spilled free in a pale shimmer, almost white with a faint blue cast where the light caught it. Her features were finer than he had realized beneath the shadow, not fragile, never that, but precise in the way carved glass looked precise. Up close, the luminous violet of her eyes felt even less earthly. My name is Lyra, she said. Ethan nodded once. Ethan. I know, she said, glancing toward the flickering sign painted backward on the inside of the front glass. Cole Repairs is not subtle branding. He let out a short laugh before he could stop himself. It startled them both a little. Then the station lights dipped. Not all the way out, just one brief shudder across the ceiling strips and the front corridor beyond. The repaired device in Lyra's hands gave a single brighter pulse in response. Ethan's smile faded. He turned toward it immediately. Lyra saw the shift in him and tightened her grip on the casing. What is wrong? She asked. Ethan listened, not to the device this time, but to the station itself. To the sudden absence of a background hum he had never noticed until it was gone. Then, from somewhere beyond the rain and steel of Dock Ring 9, came the low rolling note of a security sweep beginning on the outer levels. The note rolled through Dock Ring 9 like distant weather, low and official and impossible to ignore. Ethan crossed to the front window and pulled the slat blind halfway down, leaving only a thin strip of corridor visible beneath the bent metal edge. Blue security light swept past in slow intervals, washing the rain-streaked glass, the parts shelves, the hanging coils of wire, and the tired sign on the door in a pulse that made everything in the shop look briefly colder than it was. Lyra stood very still behind him, the repaired device tucked close beneath her coat now, its silver glow hidden from casual sight. Station sweep, Ethan said, listening. Routine on paper. Usually not routine in practice. Does it concern you? She asked. He gave her a sidelong look. On this ring, everything concerns me. That is the fun of being poor in a place run by people who call inconvenience security. The corner of her mouth moved again, almost against her will. Before she could answer, 3 quick knocks sounded against the glass, not hard enough to be official, too familiar to be a threat. Ethan exhaled and unlatched the door by 2 inches. A kid no older than 14 leaned into the gap, dripping rainwater and clutching a food crate against his chest. His delivery jacket was too thin for the weather, his hair plastered to his forehead, his cheeks red from the cold air coming through the corridor vents. Mr. Cole, he said, trying not to shiver and failing, the heater on my cart died again. If I do not finish the West Lane route, they dock my whole shift. Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose. Manny, it is almost 6:05. Why are you still running hot meals in this storm? Because people with credit still want soup, the boy said. Lyra watched the exchange without speaking. Ethan opened the door wider and stepped aside. Bring the cart in. Manny blinked. You are closing. I am regretting that in real time, Ethan said. Move. The boy hurried off and came back pulling a dented delivery cart with one wheel squealing and steam leaking from the food compartment seams. Ethan knelt beside it at once, fingers finding the access panel by memory. Cheap relay burn, he muttered. Again. Manny hovered in the doorway, embarrassed. I can pay you tomorrow. Ethan glanced up. If I wanted tomorrow, I would have become a banker. Hand me the flathead from the red tray. Lyra had not moved from the bench, but her eyes followed everything. Ethan saw it only in reflections, in the front glass, in the polished side of the cart, in the silver housing of his lamp. She was studying him now with a depth that had less to do with caution and more to do with recalculation. Manny passed the tool. Ethan swapped the blackened relay for a spare pulled from a coffee tin labeled MISC, then tightened the panel with efficient little turns of the wrist. The whole repair took less than 90 seconds. The heater kicked back on with a gust of warm air that smelled faintly of broth and overworked. Wiring. Manny's shoulders dropped in relief. Thanks, Mr. Cole. I mean it. Ethan reached behind the register, grabbed the paper cup of soup he had planned to reheat for himself, and set it into the cart's warming slot. West Lane is 18 minutes if you cut through freight, he said. You will be freezing by checkpoint 3. Eat this one before you get there and tell them it was damaged stock. Manny opened his mouth to object. Ethan pointed the screwdriver at him. Do not make me revise my opinion of you. The boy grinned, all tired gratitude and missing pride, then pulled the cart back into the corridor just as another wash of blue security light crossed the shop. When the door shut again, the room seemed quieter than before. Ethan returned the screwdriver to the tray and only then realized Lyra was looking at him the way some people looked at unfamiliar stars, not because they were bright, but because they had not expected them to exist where they did. Is this also a you custom? She asked softly, helping whoever arrives before you finish closing. Ethan shrugged and reset the latch. Things break, he said. People too. Sometimes all they need is 10 minutes and somebody who knows where to tap. Beyond the blind, the blue sweep slowed, paused, and stopped directly outside his door. The blue light held under the blind for 3 full seconds, bright enough to turn the dust in the air into drifting sparks. Ethan felt the pause in his molars. On Dock Ring 9, officials rarely stopped unless they wanted something, and what they wanted was almost never worth the paperwork it came wrapped in. He lifted one finger toward Lyra without taking his eyes off the door. Back room, he said quietly. She did not argue. That told him more than fear would have. She moved at once, gathering the dark fold of her coat around the repaired device and slipping behind the hanging divider that separated the shop floor from the cramped storage alcove and half-kitchen beyond. The curtain settled. Ethan wiped his hands on the rag again, set it beside the register, and raised the blind by 2 inches. 2 station security officers stood in the corridor under the wash of rotating blue light, one human, one not. Their rain capes shone wet at the shoulders. Both wore neutral expressions trained to suggest calm authority while promising inconvenience. The human officer, a broad man with tired eyes and a collar tab that read price, tapped the glass with one knuckle. Mr. Cole, he called through the door, routine corridor verification. Ethan slid the latch but kept the door chain on. That sounds expensive, he said. Price did not smile. There has been an advisory from upper levels. We are checking commercial units for unusual activity, unauthorized signal interference, and unregistered high-grade technology. Ethan rested his forearm against the frame and let his expression settle into the blank patience of a man who had spent years being inspected by people with cleaner shoes. I repair unregistered junk for people who do not read manuals. That is my business model. The alien officer beside Price scanned the interior with a handheld wand, slow and methodical. The device chirped softly as it passed over heaters, battery racks, old processors, and the patched breaker panel Ethan kept promising himself he would replace next month. The wand paused for a fraction too long near the back curtain. Ethan's heartbeat gave one hard thud. Then the alien officer frowned at the screen. Elevated residual surge, she said. Recent precision work. Ethan shrugged. It is a repair shop. We fight electricity here professionally. Price shifted his weight, glancing past Ethan at the workbench, at the open trays, at the smell of warm ceramic and solder still hanging in the air. Had a customer after hours, he said. Ethan nodded toward the corridor. Kid with a dead heater cart. If this is about soup, I want legal representation. For one blessed second, Price's mouth nearly betrayed amusement. Then his calm buzzed at his shoulder, sharp and insistent. He touched 2 fingers to the receiver and listened, face changing by degrees from weary to alert. "Repeat that," he said. Description confirmed. Foot traffic review all vendors within 3 corridors. He cut the line and looked back at Ethan. "Have you seen a lone off-world female in the past hour, tall, blue skin, traveling without visible escort?" Ethan let exactly 1 beat pass before answering, long enough to feel human, short enough not to look rehearsed. "This station is mostly tall and blue after 6 o'clock, officer. You are going to have to be less romantic." The alien officer did not appreciate that. Her wand swept the interior. Again. Price studied Ethan's face with the resigned concentration of a man who had learned that mechanics lied with less elegance than diplomats but often with more confidence. Then another call sounded from farther down the corridor. A vendor was shouting about a delivery drone collision. Someone cursed. A child started crying. Dock Ring 9 resumed its usual chaos right on schedule. Price exhaled through his nose. "If you remember anything unusual, report it immediately," he said. "Upper levels are treating this as priority." "I am touched they trust my judgment," Ethan replied. Price gave the shop one last look, then signaled his partner onward. Their blue sweep moved down the corridor, door by door, leaving the glass dim again except for rain and neon. Ethan waited until the sound of their boots dissolved into freight noise before closing the blind completely. The shop seemed to pull its breath back in around him. Behind the curtain, Lyra spoke for the first time since he sent her away from the front. "They are getting closer," she said. Ethan rested his hand on the latch, feeling the cold metal under his palm. "No," he answered, listening to the security sweep roll deeper into the ring. "They are already here." Lyra stepped out from behind the curtain with the careful stillness of someone who had spent a long time learning how not to take up space when danger was near. The shop light caught in her pale hair and turned it almost silver at the edges. Ethan noticed, not for the first time, that everything about her seemed built for brighter rooms than his. The back storage alcove still smelled faintly of reheated soup, dust, and the citrus cleaning solvent he used on old plastic casings. She stopped beside the workbench and listened with him, both of them facing the darkened front of the shop while rain hissed softly beyond the blinds. The security sweep had moved farther down the corridor, but the station no longer sounded normal. Too many pauses between footsteps. Too many voices cut short halfway through conversation. Too many people pretending not to look at one another. "That is not a routine search," Ethan said. "No," Lyra answered. He turned toward her. "Then you should start talking in a way that earns the repair discount you just got." Her violet eyes held his for a moment, steady and difficult. "I did not ask you to lie to station security. You did not have to." Ethan picked up the rag from the bench and folded it again, because his hands needed something to do. "I know. That is what is starting to bother me." The repaired device gave one soft pulse beneath her coat, calmer now, but responsive, like it understood the conversation concerned it. Ethan watched the fabric brighten and dim at her ribs. "What is it really?" Lyra glanced down at the hidden glow, then toward the blind-covered window, as if measuring how much truth the room could hold. "It is a witness core," she said. The words landed flat at first, technical, almost dry. Then meaning caught up. Ethan had never seen one outside a security documentary, and even there they were usually spoken of in the same tone people reserved for treaties, black boxes, and things governments denied existed until they needed them. He straightened slowly. "A witness core," he repeated. "As in encrypted evidentiary memory storage." "Yes." "As in court-level authentication." "Yes." "As in if somebody tampered with that, whatever was inside matters enough to make powerful people stop being patient." Lyra did not answer right away, which was answer enough. Ethan let out a breath that held no humor at all. "That thing walked into my shop wrapped in rainwater and bad decisions." "I know," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw how tightly she was holding herself together. Not because she was weak. Because whatever came next required strength she had already spent too much of. "Who are you, Lyra?" That finally made her blink. Not in offense. In fatigue. The kind that lived behind the eyes and had nothing to do with sleep. "My full name is Lyra Vane," she said. "I serve the Concord Scientific Council in an observational capacity." Ethan stared at her for one beat, then two. Observational capacity. That sounds like a title invented by people who bill by the hour. "It means I go where I am not meant to be noticed and verify what others prefer remain theoretical." He absorbed that in silence. Outside, a freight hauler passed close enough to rattle the front glass. Somewhere overhead, the public address system chimed once, then cut out before any announcement followed. Ethan's shop seemed to shrink around that sound. The witness. Core pulsed again, brighter this time, and a line of pale symbols flickered briefly along its hidden edge through the fabric of her coat. Ethan's gaze dropped at once. Why is it reacting? Lyra's face changed. The composure did not break, but something colder moved beneath it. "Because," she said, "whoever damaged it is searching for the same data it was built to protect, and the closer their scan net gets, the harder the core has to work to stay invisible." Ethan felt the weight of the station settle in his chest all at once, the walls, the pipes, the wet metal corridors, the officers going door to door, the whole massive ring unknowingly wrapped around a single small shop with one very dangerous piece of truth inside it. Then, from somewhere just above the front window, his old comm terminal crackled to life on its own, and a female station voice said in calm mechanical tones, "Attention commercial vendors of Dock Ring 9. By order of upper administration, all exits from this level are now temporarily sealed." The announcement seemed to pull the heat out of the room. Ethan looked up at the old comm terminal bolted crookedly above the front window as if glare alone might convince it to take the words back. Temporarily sealed. On stations like this, temporary could mean 12 minutes or 12 hours, depending on how frightened the people in charge were and how much paperwork they planned to pretend justified it. He crossed to the counter, reached under it, and tapped his local transit board awake. Half the display was dead, but the map of Dock Ring 9 flickered into view in dim green lines. Corridor gates glowed red one after another around the ring, little closing teeth locking down junctions, freight lifts, service ladders, and civilian tram access. Ethan felt something heavy settle behind his ribs. "They are not looking for a missing device anymore," he said. "They are building a net." Lyra stood very still beside the workbench, one hand resting over the witness core beneath her coat as though she could quiet it by touch alone. The silver pulse answered her palm with a muted glow. "They know the core is still active," she said. "They may not know exactly where, but they know it survived." Ethan stared at the map. "Then tell me what they are trying this hard to bury." The silence that followed was not hesitation this time. It was decision. When Lyra finally spoke, her voice had changed. It was still soft, but there was no reserve left in it, only precision. 3 weeks ago, she said, I was assigned to verify material transfers through a chain of research depots near the outer Concord borders. Officially the shipments were medical stabilization components for climate-damaged colonies. Officially, Ethan repeated. Officially. She drew a slow breath. The records were perfect. Too perfect. Audit trails aligned across 6 systems down to the second. Manifest signatures matched. Security clearance logs matched. Even the supply loss reports matched, and that was what made it wrong. Ethan glanced back at her. Because real people make sloppy paperwork. Because real people make mistakes, Lyra said. Someone had engineered an absence of mistakes. So I traced the shipments backward through archive transfer shadows instead of active declarations. I found a second routing chain hidden inside the first. She stopped there, and Ethan knew enough about dangerous information to hear the edge of it before she said the rest. What was in the hidden chain? Not medicine. Signal dampeners. Field array components. Atmospheric relay seeds. Enough material to quietly disable long-range communication over 9 inhabited worlds at once. Ethan looked at the red gate icons on the map and suddenly hated how much they resembled a diagram. To isolate them, he said. Yes. Then what? Lyra's violet eyes lifted to his, and in them he saw not panic now, but grief sharpened into function. Then you stage confusion. Trade interruption. Local emergency. Civil unrest. You let frightened governments accuse one another of sabotage before the truth can travel faster than rumor. By the time the systems reconnect, treaties are already cracking. Fleets move because somebody thinks waiting looks weak. Ethan felt the old shop around him with painful clarity then, the hum of his failing refrigerator in the back room, the faint oil smell baked into the floor, the tiny rain ticks against the window, all the ordinary things of an ordinary life standing inches away from something large enough to tilt history. And the core proves this, he said. It contains verified transfer records, command signatures, cross-authenticated relay snapshots, and the names of everyone who approved the concealed routing. If it reaches a public Concord channel intact, no one can plausibly deny. What was planned? Ethan let that sit for one breath, then another. Finally he asked the only question that mattered now. How many people know you have it? Lyra's fingers tightened once over the hidden device. Fewer than yesterday, she said. More than I would like. Then, as if the station had been waiting for the truth to finish speaking, Ethan's front door lock clicked from the outside. The sound was small, almost polite, which somehow made it worse. Ethan stared at the door as the external override motor finished its short mechanical turn and settled into silence. Rain shimmered blue beneath the blind. The chain still held, but only because old metal on dock ring 9 had learned stubbornness from the people who lived with it. Lyra's hand moved beneath her coat, not toward a weapon, Ethan noticed, but toward the witness core as if instinct told her that if the truth survived, the rest could still be negotiated. Ethan lifted one hand toward her without looking back. Do not move, he said softly. Then he crossed to the counter and leaned down, opening the drawer beneath the register where he kept the things no station inspector ever thought worth stealing. Spare relays. 3 credit chips. A cracked photo of his parents taken in bad sunlight 20 years earlier. And an old junction spoofer the size of a deck of cards, built from salvage and patience and one regrettable week of helping a freight broker avoid tariff censors. He pulled it out and thumbed the side switch. A faint amber line lit across its edge. Lyra watched him with narrowed eyes. What is that? The reason my utility bill sometimes looks more honest than my wiring, Ethan said. He moved quickly now, not panicked, just exact. He crouched beside the wall panel near the floor, popped the cover, and exposed a nest of patched conduits humming with station current. The smell of dust and warmed insulation rose at once. Behind him, the door handle tested itself once with a measured push. Whoever stood outside was still pretending this could remain civil. Ethan clipped the spoofer into the maintenance line and rerouted local current through the shop's old diagnostic mesh. The ceiling strips dimmed. The bench lamp brightened. For 1 second every loose screw, every hanging coil of wire, every cracked screen in the room seemed to sharpen under a sudden electrical focus. Then the front window went opaque from the inside, blooming with static haze as the shop dropped off the corridor scan grid. Lyra stared. You can hide the room. For about 90 seconds, Ethan said. 100 if the station technician on duty is lazy or flirting. After that, every system within 2 corridors will know I am tampering with the infrastructure. Another measured push came against the door, harder this time, enough to make the chain give a dry metallic complaint. Ethan stood. Then 90 seconds is not enough, Lyra said. No, he answered, but it is enough to stop pretending I am uninvolved. That landed between them with more force than a shout would have. He could feel the choice taking shape even before he spoke it aloud. If he handed her over now, maybe they would call him cooperative. Maybe they would leave his shop standing. Maybe they would even pay enough to cover the resonance bridge he had already sacrificed. He could clear his debts. Replace the roof. Sleep for 1 week without calculating survival in parts and bills and hours. He thought of all of it in a single breath. Then he thought of 9 worlds going silent because powerful people preferred confusion to conscience, and of one woman crossing a storm with failing truth held to her chest because she had run out of safer doors to knock on. Ethan reached for his coat hanging by the back entrance and tossed it to Lyra. "Put that on," he said. Her brows drew together. "Where are we going?" He grabbed a portable power pack, a coil line, and the transit board from the counter, already tracing routes in his head through service ducts, coolant runs, and freight maintenance tunnels no elegant planner had ever expected civilians to memorize. "You said the Corps needs a public Concord channel," he replied. Lyra caught the coat but did not move yet. "The back corridors are sealed." Ethan gave the shop one quick look, the bench, the tools, the flickering sign, the little life he had built out of discarded things and repeated effort. Then he reached up and killed the main breaker. Darkness dropped hard and complete, leaving only the silver pulse beneath Lyra's coat and the thin blue leak of rainlight under the door. "Good," he said. "It means they will not expect us to use the route only broken people know exists." The route only broken people knew began behind Ethan's freezer unit, where the wall panel looked permanent until you struck the lower hinge with exactly the right amount of disrespect. The metal gave with a tired click. Cold air spilled out from a narrow service shaft lined with old conduit, rust-stained brackets, and maintenance rungs polished smooth by years of hands that official maps never counted. Ethan slung the power pack over one shoulder, tucked the transit board under his arm, and held the panel open for Lyra. The silver pulse beneath her borrowed coat painted faint light across the shaft's interior. "You built this," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No. People like me just remember what rich planners forget. Pipes need access. Wires need space. Sooner or later, somebody desperate learns the difference between a wall and an opinion." They moved single file through the narrow dark, boots ringing softly on old metal. The station sounded different from inside its bones. Not like a place of commerce and noise, but a giant machine arguing with itself in currents, fans, relay clicks, and distant vibration. Ethan counted junctions by memory and heat changes by instinct. Left at the coolant manifold where the air tasted faintly of copper. Down 16 rungs past the defunct inspection hatch marked with an outdated serial code. Across the crawl trench above freight customs where voices drifted up through the grate in clipped, tense bursts. Twice they froze while security teams passed below, blue light sweeping through seams in the flooring like water under a door. Lyra never complained. She kept pace in silence, one hand braced on the witness core under her coat, the other following Ethan's shoulder through the dark whenever the shaft narrowed too tightly to trust the rungs alone. At last the tunnel opened into an abandoned service platform overlooking the central weather spine, a vertical maintenance chamber that ran like a steel throat through 3 levels of the ring. Far above, emergency lamps glowed dim amber. Far below, the station's sealed corridors pulsed with red status strips and moving blue patrol light. Ethan crouched by a locked utility cabinet and pried it open with the flathead he always kept in his boot. Inside sat an old Concord emergency uplink module, dusty but intact, installed decades earlier for disaster broadcasts and never upgraded because nothing important ever happened to poor districts until it happened all at once. Lyra stared at it. "This line still routes to public channels. It did the last time a pressure valve blew and half the ring needed evacuation orders," Ethan said. "The hardware is ugly, but ugly lasts." He dropped the power pack beside the unit, bridged the dead input with 2 clipped leads, and brought the console awake in a shudder of amber screens and whining capacitors. The module asked for authorization. Lyra pulled the witness core free at last. In the dull service light, its silver heart looked steady and almost serene, as if it had always known where it needed to go. She placed her palm against the scanner. The console rejected her. Ethan frowned. Why? She looked at the screen, then at the old human-made ports along the side of the uplink. The core was built to verify trust chains across mixed systems, she said softly. It needs a secondary manual witness to force public release. Ethan already knew what that meant before she said his name. He set his hand beside hers on the scarred metal console. The screen flashed, translated, recalculated, then opened like a held breath. Data poured across the display in bright columns, shipment logs, approval trees, signatures, relay seeds, routing proofs, entire constellations of deliberate deceit unfolding faster than Ethan could read them. Below them, alarms changed pitch all across Dock Ring 9. Someone had noticed. Lyra lifted her chin, and when she spoke into the uplink her voice carried none of the fear from the alley, only truth honed to purpose. This is Lyra Vane of the Concord Scientific Council. I am initiating protected public release of authenticated evidence concerning coordinated communications sabotage across 9 inhabited systems. Immediate verification may be obtained through Witness Core Channel 7. She paused, looking once at Ethan as the final release prompt appeared. Then she added, clear enough for every public screen in the galaxy to hear, this transmission exists because one human on Dock Ring 9 chose to repair what others would have priced, questioned, or surrendered. Manual witness authorization, Ethan Cole. The console chimed. The upload locked. And all across the station, across the ring, across the trade lanes and embassy halls and freight ports and polished chambers that had never once imagined his life, every public screen turned black before revealing his name in white. For the next few seconds, neither of them moved. The emergency uplink hummed under Ethan's hands, warm and old and suddenly more important than anything that had ever sat on his workbench. Below the abandoned service platform, Dock Ring 9 went unnaturally still. No carts rattled. No vendors shouted. Even the freight lanes seemed to pause between breaths, as if the station itself had heard its own name spoken in the same sentence as truth and was waiting to learn what that would cost. Then the public address system tried to interrupt the transmission and failed. Once. Twice. On the third attempt, it dissolved into static and gave up. Ethan looked at the nearest maintenance screen bolted to the wall across from the uplink. His own name remained there in stark white letters over a field of stars, too clean and too bright to belong to him. He had spent most of his adult life being overlooked on principle. Men like Ethan Cole were useful when heaters died, when relays burned out, when old doors stopped opening and nobody important wanted to wait. They were not the sort of men who appeared on public channels. They were certainly not the sort of men entire governments heard about at the same time. Lyra watched the data release counter finish its climb to full verification, then exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding the weight of 9 endangered worlds in the center of her chest and had only now been given permission to set it down. When she turned toward him, the silver heart of the witness core had dimmed to a calm resting glow. It is done, she said. Ethan let out a dry breath. That seems like the kind of sentence people regret saying too early. For the first time since she had stepped out of the rain and into his shop, Lyra smiled without caution. It changed her face more than he expected. Not softer exactly. Clearer. As though tension had been a veil and truth, however costly, had finally burned it away. You have a suspicious relationship with hopeful moments, she said. I repair public infrastructure on a private budget, Ethan answered. Hopeful moments usually come with paperwork. Somewhere below them, corridor locks began to disengage one by one. The red status strips flicked to amber, then green. A different tone rolled through the station now, not pursuit, not warning, but the dense overlapping sound of 1,000 people learning something at once and immediately trying to tell each other what it meant. Names would be checked. Signatures would be matched. Denials would already be failing in well-lit rooms on better worlds than this one. Ethan imagined fleet officers standing straighter, diplomats going pale, analysts speaking too fast, and somebody somewhere realizing that a plan built on silence had just been undone by a repair bench, a hidden service route, and one human being too stubborn to charge for mercy. Lyra drew the borrowed coat tighter around herself and looked at him in that searching way she had, only now there was no uncertainty in it. "They will come for you," she said. "Officials. Journalists. Investigators. People who ignored this rain yesterday and will call it historic tomorrow." Ethan considered that, then looked down at his oil-stained sleeve, the scraped knuckles, the portable power pack at his feet held together with a strap he had meant to replace last month. "They can take a number," he said. "I have work in the morning." A soft laugh escaped her then, brief and bright against the steel and static of the old platform. When they made their way back through the maintenance spine, the station no longer felt like a trap. It felt like aftermath. By the time Ethan returned to his shop, the front blind was half torn, the chain on the door had finally surrendered, and rain-cooled air moved through the room carrying the smell of wet metal and distant coffee from a vendor 2 corridors over. Nothing inside had changed much. The bench lamp still leaned to the left. The register still stuck unless you hit the side. The rag he had folded 3 different times still lay where he left it. On the workbench, Lyra set down the witness core, now quiet and whole, its silver surface reflecting the humble clutter of his life as if it belonged there for one impossible second. Ethan rested his hands on the scarred metal edge of the bench and looked at the place where he had repaired it, the exact spot where a small act of usefulness had crossed paths with the kind of truth that bent history. He was not built for speeches. He was not a soldier, not a statesman, not a man born to command rooms larger than this one. He was just a mechanic on Dock Ring 9 who hated watching things fail when he still had a chance to fix them. Outside, somewhere beyond the rain and neon and the crowded corridors now full of his name, the galaxy was rearranging itself around what had been revealed. Inside the shop, the old refrigerator